The Galactic University's xenobiology department occupied 17 floors of crystalline architecture that defied at least 3 laws of physics and probably violated a few more just for fun. On the 42nd floor, in lecture hall Zeta 9, Professor Kethvar adjusted his ceremonial teaching robes and cleared his throat with the kind of pompous authority that only comes from having 6 PhDs and an ego the size of a small moon. "Students," he announced to the assembled collection of tentacles, scales, and various other appendages that passed for his advanced predator studies class, "today marks a pinnacle in your educational journey. After decades of theoretical study, you will witness firsthand the galaxy's most lethal killing machine." His teaching assistant, Zoop, nervously polished his 3 eye stalks while fidgeting with the containment field controls. Zoop was a Bloraxian, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a purple octopus with an anxiety disorder and given the result a degree in theoretical xenobiology. He'd spent the last week having nightmares about this demonstration, mostly involving various ways he could accidentally release an apex predator into a classroom full of students who barely knew which end of a plasma rifle to hold. "Ransom, Professor," Zoop whispered, his voice carrying that particular tremor that suggested he was about 3 seconds away from a nervous breakdown. "Are we absolutely certain the containment field will hold? Because last time we tried this, with the Venusian acid spitters, the janitor still hasn't grown back his—" "Zoop," Kethvar interrupted with the kind of smile that suggested he'd rather feed his teaching assistant to the specimen than listen to another word of concern. "Your lack of confidence in proper scientific protocols is precisely why you remain an assistant after 17 years. The students, meanwhile, had arranged themselves in what could generously be called strategic seating. The Proximan twins had claimed the back row and were already eyeing the emergency exits. A young Altarian was methodically checking her personal shield generator for the 5th time in as many minutes. Even Grex, who was basically a sentient rock formation and theoretically immune to most forms of physical trauma, had somehow managed to look nervous. And then there was Jake Martinez. Jake sat in the 3rd row, dead center, with the kind of relaxed posture that suggested he was more concerned about his lunch plans than witnessing galactic history. He was hunched over his datapad, frantically scribbling notes for what appeared to be a completely different class. His dark hair stuck up at odd angles in that universal sign of a college student who'd chosen sleep over grooming. And his clothes looked like they'd been grabbed from the floor of his dorm room in the dark. He was, according to his student file, the first human to ever attend Galactic University. This was partly because humans had only recently been discovered, and partly because most of the galaxy's academic institutions were still debating whether humans actually existed, or were just really persistent urban legends. Kethvar had initially opposed accepting a human student, not because he had anything against humans personally, but because he wasn't entirely convinced they were real. The application had come through standard channels, complete with all the proper documentation, but Kethvar had seen enough forged paperwork in his time to remain skeptical. Humans were supposed to be mythical after all, everyone knew that. But the university's diversity committee had insisted, and Kethvar's funding depended on maintaining good relations with the diversity committee. So here was Jake Martinez, looking about as mythical as a ham sandwich and twice as ordinary. "Now then," Kethvar continued, warming to his favorite subject, "what we're about to observe is a void stalker in its natural aggressive state. These magnificent creatures represent the absolute pinnacle of evolutionary killing efficiency. Their sensory arrays can detect a heartbeat from 3 kilometers away, their retractable claws can slice through reinforced titanium like tissue paper, and their hunting instincts are so refined that they can track prey across 17 star systems." Jake looked up from his datapad just long enough to stifle a yawn. "Professor, how long is this going to take? I've got quantum physics in 20 minutes, and Professor Quell said there'd be bonus points if we actually showed up on time for once." Several students turned to stare at Jake with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for watching someone pet a live grenade. Speaking during one of Kethvar's lectures was like interrupting a religious ceremony, except with more tentacles and significantly worse consequences. Kethvar's expression shifted through several colors of indignation before settling on a particularly vibrant shade of academic superiority. "Mr. Martinez, perhaps you'd prefer to skip this demonstration and explain to your future employers why you missed witnessing galactic history in the making." Jake shrugged. "I mean, if it's really quick, sure. But I already read the chapter on apex predators last night. They're basically just really efficient animals, right? Big teeth, fast reflexes, probably smell terrible. How complicated can it be?" The silence that followed this statement was the kind of profound quiet that usually preceded either enlightenment or catastrophe. In this case, it was definitely leaning toward catastrophe. "Very well," Kethvar said, his voice carrying the particular tone professors used when they were about to make a student regret their life choices. Let's begin the demonstration. Zoop, activate the containment field and prepare for specimen introduction. Zoop's eye stalks swiveled nervously as he began powering up the massive containment system that dominated the front of the lecture hall. The air itself seemed to thicken as the field generators hummed to life, creating a shimmering barrier that could theoretically contain anything short of a small supernova. Students, Kethvar announced with theatrical grandeur, I present to you the apex predator of 17 different star systems, the nightmare that haunts the dreams of civilizations across 3 galactic arms, the one creature that even the warrior clans of Rigel refuse to hunt. He paused for dramatic effect, savoring the terrified silence of his audience. Behold the Void Stalker. What happened next could only be described as controlled chaos, emphasis on the chaos part. The specimen transport tube descended from the ceiling with all the dramatic flair of a stage production, complete with ominous mechanical whirring and flashing warning lights that bathed the entire lecture hall in an appropriately terrifying red glow. The tube itself was made of some impossibly strong transparent material that had probably cost more than most students' annual tuition, and inside it was something that made every sentient being in the room suddenly remember they had urgent business elsewhere. The Void Stalker was, in a word, magnificent. In several other words, it was absolutely pants-sweatingly terrifying. Picture a creature that evolution had specifically designed to be the stuff of nightmares. It stood roughly 3 meters tall on 6 legs that ended in claws capable of carving through starship hulls. Its hide was a matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating the unsettling impression that parts of it simply didn't exist. 2 rows of sensors along its elongated skull glowed with a soft blue light that somehow managed to look both beautiful and deeply wrong at the same time. But it was the teeth that really sold the whole apex predator thing. Rows upon rows of crystalline fangs that caught the light and threw it back in ways that made your brain hurt just looking at them. This was a creature that didn't just kill its prey, it made killing its prey into an art form. The moment the containment field activated around the transport tube, roughly half the class decided they had suddenly developed pressing appointments literally anywhere else in the galaxy. The Proximon twins were the first to break, scrambling over desks with the kind of desperate speed usually reserved for escaping black holes. The young Altarian made it exactly 3 steps toward the door before her legs gave out and she collapsed behind her desk in what appeared to be a defensive fetal position. Grex, the sentient rock formation, somehow managed to look pale despite being made entirely of granite and fear. Magnificent, Kethvar breathed, apparently immune to the waves of pure terror radiating from his specimen. Observe the perfect killing posture, the way it surveys its environment for potential threats and prey. Notice how even in containment, it maintains complete predatorial awareness. The Void Stalker had indeed begun surveying the room, its sensor array sweeping methodically across the cowering students like some kind of biological targeting system. Its head moved with the smooth, precise motion of something that had never once in its evolutionary history needed to hurry, because nothing had ever been fast enough to require hurrying. Zoop, meanwhile, was checking and rechecking his containment field readings with the manic intensity of someone who really didn't want to become a footnote in galactic history. Professor, all systems are green, but I'm reading some unusual energy fluctuations in the... Perfectly normal, Kethvar waved dismissively. The creature is simply acclimating to its new environment. Continue the demonstration. Jake, oblivious to the fact that he was sharing a room with the galactic equivalent of a nuclear weapon with teeth, had returned to his datapad and was apparently working through quantum mechanics problems. He absently reached into his backpack, pulled out what appeared to be some kind of earth food wrapped in crinkly packaging, and began eating while continuing to scribble calculations. The Void Stalker's sensor sweep reached Jake's section of the classroom and suddenly stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature remained perfectly still, its glowing sensors focused intently on the human student, who was completely absorbed in determining the probability wave function of a theoretical particle, while munching on what his packaging proclaimed to be extreme cheese Doritos. Then the Void Stalker's head tilted slightly to one side in what could almost be described as confusion. Excellent, Kethvar continued his lecture, apparently not noticing that his prize specimen had stopped moving entirely. Notice how the creature has identified the most significant threat in the room and is now assessing its tactical options. The Void Stalker's brain can process over 17 different attack scenarios simultaneously, weighing environmental factors, escape routes, and prey capabilities to determine the optimal killing strategy. Jake looked up from his homework, finally noticing that everyone was staring in his general direction. He followed their gaze to the front of the room, saw the massive predator, and blinked once. "Ha," he said with all the enthusiasm of someone discovering that it was raining outside. "That's new. Is this thing supposed to be scary or something?" The Void Stalker, upon hearing Jake's voice, did something that no Void Stalker in recorded galactic history had ever done before. It took a step backward, then another. Then it made a sound that could only be described as a whimper. The lecture hall fell into the kind of silence that usually preceded either enlightenment or the heat death of the universe. Kethvar's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. Zoop's 3 eye stalks swiveled frantically between his instruments and the specimen, as if hoping his readings would somehow explain what was happening. Jake, meanwhile, popped another chip into his mouth and returned to his quantum mechanics homework. "Could you guys keep it down a little?" he asked without looking up. "These probability calculations are hard enough without all the dramatic pausing." What happened next would later be described by xenobiology textbooks as the incident that broke everything we thought we knew about apex predators. More accurate descriptions, submitted by traumatized students in their incident reports, included phrases like, "Reality had a complete nervous breakdown," and "I need therapy, and possibly a new major." The Void Stalker, still focused intently on Jake, began making a sound that no creature designed by evolution to be the perfect killing machine should ever, under any circumstances, be capable of making. It was a soft, plaintive whining noise, like a puppy that had been told it couldn't have a treat. Except this puppy was 3 meters tall, had claws that could slice through battle armor, and was supposed to be the stuff of galactic nightmares. "Professor," Zoop whispered, his voice climbing several octaves into ranges that probably violated noise ordinances. "The containment readings are normal, but the specimen appears to be... distressed? That's not the right word. Terrified? That's not right either. Professor, I don't think we have a word for what's happening to the specimen." Kethvar stared at his prize exhibit with the expression of a man watching his entire academic career crumble into dust. The Void Stalker had now retreated as far as the containment field would allow, and was attempting to hide behind the specimen feeding apparatus, which was roughly the size of a coffee table, and about as effective as hiding behind a toothpick. "This is impossible," Kethvar muttered, checking his notes frantically. "Void Stalkers don't retreat. They don't hide. They certainly don't make pathetic whimpering sounds. According to every study ever conducted, they're biologically incapable of experiencing fear." Jake finally looked up from his homework, noticed that the giant scary thing was making noise, and sighed with the kind of world-weary exhaustion that only comes from being a college student during finals week. "Look, I get that this is probably educational or whatever," Jake said, waving his pen in the general direction of the specimen. "But could you maybe give it a chew toy or something? I've got a quantum physics exam tomorrow, and Professor Quell already said anyone who fails has to retake the entire course during summer session. Do you know what summer session is like? It's like regular classes, except everyone's miserable and the air conditioning never works." The Void Stalker's whimpering intensified. Several students who had been peeking out from behind their desks now stood up cautiously, drawn by the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. A creature that could theoretically hunt and kill every sentient being in the room simultaneously was cowering like a scared animal, and making sounds that belonged in a petting zoo, not a high-security xenobiology demonstration. "Jake," whispered Trixa, a vegan exchange student who had been hiding under her desk since the moment the transport tube appeared. "Jake? What did you do to it?" "Do to what?" Jake looked around the room with genuine confusion. "I'm literally just sitting here doing homework. You guys are all acting like I'm juggling live grenades or something." Zoop had given up on his instruments entirely, and was now staring at the scene with the kind of fascinated horror usually reserved for watching natural disasters unfold in slow motion. "Professor, the creature's stress indicators are off the charts. Its heart rate is elevated, its body temperature has dropped 3 degrees, and according to these readings, it's producing stress hormones at levels that should be physiologically impossible." "That can't be right," Kethvar snapped, but his voice lacked its usual academic authority. "Check the sensors, run a full diagnostic. There must be some kind of malfunction." The Void Stalker, meanwhile, had discovered that hiding behind the feeding apparatus wasn't working, and had moved on to Plan B, which apparently involved trying to make itself as small as possible while still maintaining visual contact with Jake. It had actually managed to curl up into what could generously be called a ball, if balls were made of nightmares, and had way too many legs. Jake took another bite of his chips and returned to his calculations, muttering something about eigenvalues and wave functions. The sound of his voice caused the Void Stalker to emit another whimper, this one accompanied by what appeared to be an attempt to cover its sensor array with its front claws. "Okay, this is getting weird," announced Grex, the rock formation, who was apparently qualified to make pronouncements about weirdness by virtue of being a sentient mineral. "I've seen scared animals before. This thing isn't just scared, it's having an existential crisis." "Don't be ridiculous," Kethvar protested, though his protest lacked conviction. "Void Stalkers are apex predators. They don't have existential crises. They cause existential crises." "Professor," Chixa said quietly, "what if Jake isn't what we think he is?" The lecture hall fell silent except for the continued whimpering from the containment field and the sound of Jake's pen scratching across his datapad as he worked through another problem set. Zoop's 3 eye stalks slowly swiveled to focus on Jake with the kind of dawning horror that usually preceded major scientific revelations. "Professor, what do we actually know about humans? I mean really know, not just the basic classification data from the admission files." Kethvar opened his mouth to deliver what was probably going to be a lecture about proper academic skepticism, but then closed it again. The truth was, nobody really knew much about humans. They'd appeared on the galactic scene relatively recently with standard documentation and apparently peaceful intentions, but actual detailed studies were still pending approval from about 17 different academic committees. And academic committees... Jake finished another calculation, looked up at the still whimpering Void Stalker, and shook his head with mild annoyance. "Seriously, guys, can someone please give that thing some food or a blanket or whatever apex predators need to calm down? I've still got 6 more problems to solve, and at this rate I'm going to be here all night." The Void Stalker responded to this suggestion by attempting to burrow into the floor of its containment field while making sounds that were definitely not supposed to come from anything with that many teeth. "All right, that's it," Kethvar declared, his academic composure finally cracking like a poorly maintained containment field. "Mr. Martinez, I demand to know what you've done to my specimen. Did you drug it? Use some kind of pheromone weapon? Deploy an illegal neural disruptor?" Jake looked up from his homework with the expression of someone who had just been accused of stealing the moon. "I literally haven't done anything except sit here and try to figure out why quantum particles refuse to stay in one place like reasonable objects. I haven't even looked at your scary pet for more than 5 seconds total." "Exactly," Kethvar pointed an accusatory tentacle at Jake. "That's clearly some kind of advanced psychological warfare technique. You're using calculated indifference to confuse a creature that relies on fear responses from its prey." "Or," suggested Trixa hesitantly, "maybe it's something else entirely. Professor, when exactly did humans join the galactic community? I mean, the exact date." Kethvar paused, his righteous academic fury momentarily derailed by what was clearly a trick question. "Well, obviously it was, that is to say, the official documentation indicates." "Zoop, when did humans officially make contact?" Zoop's eye stalk swiveled frantically through his database access. Professor, according to the records, first official contact was established approximately 6 months ago, but there are some inconsistencies in the historical data that I've been meaning to investigate." "What kind of inconsistencies?" Jake asked, finally giving the conversation his full attention now that it had moved away from accusations of predator tampering and towards something that sounded like it might actually be interesting. "Well," Zoop said nervously, "there are references to humans in historical texts dating back thousands of years, but they're all classified as mythology or folklore, stories told to children mostly, urban legends shared by deep space traders, that sort of thing." The Void Stalker made another pathetic whimpering sound and somehow managed to press itself even flatter against the floor of its containment field. "What kind of stories?" Trixa pressed, and there was something in her voice that suggested she really didn't want to know the answer. Zup's database search was apparently returning results, because his eye stalks had gone very still in the way that indicated either deep concentration or complete system failure. Oh no. Oh, this is very bad." "Just tell us," Grex rumbled with the patience of someone who had literally been around since mountains were considered cutting-edge geological technology. "The stories call them the bipedal death walkers of Sol 3, Zoop said quietly. "According to galactic folklore, they're persistence hunters who can track prey across entire star systems. They're supposed to be tool musers who can turn literally anything into a weapon, but the really terrifying part is that they're supposed to be pack bond capable with virtually any species." "Pack bond capable?" Jake asked. "You mean like making friends?" The silence that followed this question was the kind of profound quiet that usually indicated someone had just said something that recontextualized everything in deeply disturbing ways. Not making friends, Zoop whispered. Domestication. The stories say that Deathwalkers have the ability to take any creature, no matter how dangerous, and turn it into a loyal companion. They supposedly did this to the apex predators of their own world, creating creatures called dogs that became completely dependent on human approval. Jake blinked. Oh, you mean like pets? Yeah, we've got lots of those. I had a cat named Mr. Whiskers when I was a kid. He was great, except he kept bringing me dead mice as presents, which was gross, but I guess he meant well. The Voidstalker's whimpering reached new levels of pathetic terror. You see, Zoop continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a cosmic horror that defied rational comprehension. The folklore says that Deathwalkers don't just kill their prey. They have the ability to make their prey want to be killed. Or worse, they make their prey want to serve them forever. The stories described creatures that were once proud apex predators reduced to performing tricks for food and seeking approval from their Deathwalker masters. That's ridiculous, Kethvar protested, but his protest sounded increasingly hollow. Humans are clearly a peaceful species. They applied for educational exchange programs, they filled out all the proper paperwork, they even submitted a complete cultural overview that described them as mostly harmless and generally friendly. Professor, Trixaw said slowly, what if the paperwork was just really good psychological warfare? Jake, meanwhile, had been listening to this conversation with growing bewilderment. Wait, hold on. Are you guys seriously telling me that there are galactic legends about humans being scary? That's insane. We're not scary, we're just people. We like pizza and movies and arguing about sports. The scariest thing most humans do is leave passive-aggressive notes about dirty dishes in shared refrigerators. The Voidstalker, hearing Jake's voice again, attempted to dig through the floor of its containment field, while making sounds that were definitely not supposed to emerge from anything that had been genetically engineered for optimal killing efficiency. But that's exactly what makes it so terrifying, Zoop explained with growing horror. According to the folklore, Deathwalkers are masters of deception. They appear harmless, even friendly, right up until the moment they decide to make you into their next domesticated pet. The stories say that the process is so insidious that victims actually begin to enjoy their captivity. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Jake said flatly. Humans don't go around domesticating random aliens. We can barely manage to domesticate ourselves. Half of us can't even remember to water our houseplants. Houseplants? Grex asked, with the kind of dread that suggested this was somehow the most terrifying revelation yet. Yeah, you know, plants that we keep inside our homes for decoration. Sometimes we talk to them. There's this whole theory that it helps them grow better, although I'm pretty sure that's just something people tell themselves to feel less weird about talking to vegetation. The lecture hall fell into complete silence. Even the Voidstalker stopped whimpering, apparently too horrified by this information to continue making sounds. You keep plants captive for your own amusement, Trixa said slowly, and you talk to them. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of weird, Jake admitted. But they seem happy enough. I mean, they don't try to escape or anything. Zoop made a sound that might have been a sob. Professor, I think we need to call someone. The Dean, maybe. Or possibly the Galactic Defense Force. I'm not sure who you're supposed to contact when you discover that mythological apex predators are real, and one of them is sitting in your classroom asking for extra credit. What happened next could only be described as the academic equivalent of a supernova, if supernovas involved a lot more screaming and significantly more paperwork. Word of the incident spread across campus with the kind of speed usually reserved for gossip about faculty scandals or news that the cafeteria had finally gotten edible food. Within approximately 4 minutes, every student with a working communication device knew that there was a real, actual, mythological Deathwalker sitting in Xenobiology Lecture Hall Zeta 9, apparently doing homework and complaining about the noise level. Within 6 minutes, half the campus was either evacuating or trying to get a better look, depending on their individual risk tolerance and social media followings. Within 8 minutes, the windows of the lecture hall were completely surrounded by faces pressed against the transparent aluminum, creating the deeply surreal image of dozens of alien students trying to catch a glimpse of the galaxy's most legendary apex predator while he worked through quantum mechanics problems. This is getting out of hand, Kethvar muttered, watching a group of Andromedans set up what appeared to be professional recording equipment outside the window. Zoop, activate the privacy screens. I tried, Professor, but someone overrode the system. Apparently, the dean's office wants full documentation of this unprecedented xenobiological event for their research archives. Jake looked up from his homework, noticed the crowd gathering outside, and frowned with mild annoyance. Great, now I'm never going to be able to concentrate. Hey, is there maybe a quieter room where I could finish this? I've only got 12 more problems to solve, and Professor Quell is really strict about late submissions. The Voidstalker, hearing Jake's voice again, made what could only be described as a sound of existential despair and began attempting to offer Jake various pieces of equipment from its containment field. A feeding dish, part of the environmental control system, what appeared to be a small section of the floor that it had somehow managed to claw loose. Is it trying to give me presents? Jake asked, staring at the pathetic display with the bewildered expression of someone whose day had taken several turns he hadn't expected. According to the folklore, Zoop said weakly, creatures that have been domesticated by Deathwalkers become desperate for approval and will offer gifts to their masters as a sign of submission. But I didn't domesticate it, Jake protested. I don't even know what it eats. Although, he added thoughtfully, it does look kind of sad. Maybe it's lonely? I had a goldfish once that used to get depressed if I didn't talk to it enough. The Voidstalker apparently understood enough basic galactic standard to recognize that Jake was talking about it, because it immediately perked up and began making what could generously be described as hopeful chirping sounds while continuing to offer random bits of its containment field as tribute. Oh no, Trixa whispered. It's happening. It's actually happening. We're witnessing the domestication of a Voidstalker in real time. At this point, campus security finally arrived, took one look at the situation through the window and immediately called for backup. The backup took one look at the situation and called for more backup. This continued until there was essentially a small army of security personnel standing around outside the lecture hall, all of them trying to figure out exactly what protocol covered mythical apex predator accidentally confirms existence of other mythical apex predator while doing homework. Attention students and faculty, came an announcement over the campus communication system. This is Dean Korthak. Please maintain a safe distance from Xenobiology Lecture Hall Zeta 9 while we assess the current situation. And could someone please explain to me why my emergency alerts are listing the threat level as apocalyptic but possibly educational? Jake sighed and looked up from his datapad. Look, I appreciate that this is apparently some kind of big deal for everyone, but I really do need to finish this homework. Could someone maybe just explain to me what's going on, because from where I'm sitting, I've got a scared animal making weird noises, a professor having what looks like a nervous breakdown, and about 50 people taking pictures of me through the window like I'm some kind of zoo exhibit. You are a zoo exhibit, Grex pointed out helpfully. Specifically, you're an exhibit of the galaxy's most terrifying mythological creature pretending to be a harmless college student while accidentally domesticating our most dangerous known predator species through the power of casual indifference. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, Jake said. I'm not terrifying. I'm a sophomore majoring in applied physics with a minor in xenocultural studies. My biggest accomplishment this semester is that I finally figured out how to use the cafeteria food synthesizers without accidentally creating toxic waste. How is that terrifying? The Voidstalker chose this moment to successfully excavate a small section of containment field flooring and present it to Jake with the kind of hopeful expression that suggested it was very proud of its gift and desperately hoped for approval. Because, Zoop said with the tone of someone explaining a fundamental law of the universe to a child, you just made a Voidstalker want to please you. These creatures are supposed to be the ultimate killing machines, and this one is acting like a puppy that wants a belly rub. Jake looked at the Voidstalker, which was now making what could only be described as happy chirping sounds and doing a little dance that involved way too many legs. Huh. That is kind of weird. Although, he added thoughtfully, it's also kind of cute. In a horrifying sort of way. The sound that emerged from every alien in the lecture hall was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. He thinks it's cute, Trixaw whispered. The Deathwalker thinks the galaxy's apex predator is cute. At that exact moment, Dean Korthak finally arrived, flanked by what appeared to be half the university's administrative staff, and looking like someone who had aged several years in the past 10 minutes. Dean Korthak was a crystalline, which meant he looked like someone had carved a person out of living mineral and then given him a really expensive suit and several advanced degrees. He was also approximately 3,000 years old, which meant he'd seen pretty much everything the galaxy had to offer in terms of academic crises. This was apparently his first Deathwalker situation. Mr. Martinez, the dean said carefully, his voice carrying the kind of measured calm that suggested he was probably screaming internally. I need you to very slowly and very carefully explain to me exactly what you did to our Voidstalker specimen. Jake looked up at the dean with the expression of someone who had been asked to explain quantum physics using only interpretive dance. I sat here and did my homework. That's literally it. I mean, I ate some chips and complained about the noise level, but I'm pretty sure those aren't war crimes. Dean Korthek's crystalline features somehow managed to convey the expression of someone whose 3,000-year lifespan had not adequately prepared him for this moment. He looked at Jake, then at the Voidstalker, which was now attempting to arrange its gift of containment field debris into an aesthetically pleasing pattern, while making happy chirping sounds. Mr. Martinez, the dean said slowly, do you understand that according to galactic folklore, your species is supposed to be the stuff of nightmares? That parents across 17 star systems tell stories about Deathwalkers to make their children behave? Jake blinked. Really? That's kind of cool, I guess. Does this mean I can get extra credit for accidentally being mythologically significant? Because I could really use the grade boost in this class. The sound that emerged from Dean Korthek could only be described as the academic equivalent of a death rattle. Extra credit, the dean repeated faintly. Yeah, I mean, if I'm apparently some kind of legendary apex predator, that's got to be worth at least a few points, right? I've been working really hard on understanding xenobiology principles, and this seems like a pretty practical demonstration of interspecies dynamics. The Voidstalker, hearing Jake's voice again, abandoned its debris arrangement project and began what could only be described as an attempt at performing tricks. It stood on its hind legs. It spun in a circle. It made a noise that might have been an attempt at singing. It's trying to entertain him, Zoop whispered in horrified fascination. The galaxy's apex predator is performing for a Deathwalker's approval. This is simultaneously the most terrifying and most adorable thing I've ever witnessed, Trixa added, apparently having moved past fear into some kind of academic Stockholm syndrome. Jake watched the Voidstalker's performance with growing amusement. You know what? It really is kind of cute. I mean, in a could probably eat me in one bite but chooses not to sort of way. It's like having a really big, really dangerous dog. Dean Korthek closed his eyes and took several deep breaths, probably contemplating early retirement. Mr. Martinez, I'm going to make you an offer. The university will provide you with full academic honors, a research grant, and your own laboratory space if you agree to help us study this phenomenon under controlled conditions. Can I keep Fluffy? Jake asked. Everyone in the room turned to stare at him. Fluffy? The dean asked weakly. That's what I'm calling it, Jake said, pointing at the Voidstalker, which had apparently decided that rolling over was the next logical step in its impromptu performance routine. I mean, look at it. It's basically a giant, terrifying puppy. And it's fluffy. Sort of. In a way that would probably cut your hand off if you tried to pet it, but the intention is there. The Voidstalker, now officially named Fluffy, responded to Jake's attention by making what could generously be described as purring sounds while continuing to roll around in its containment field, like the galaxy's most dangerous golden retriever. Professor Kethvar, who had been quietly having an existential crisis in the corner, finally spoke up. I think I need to rethink my entire career, and possibly my understanding of the universe, and definitely my research methodology. Don't feel bad, Professor, Jake said cheerfully. I'm pretty sure everyone's having their worldview challenged today, although I've got to say this has been way more interesting than my usual Tuesday classes. Most of the time, the biggest excitement in xenobiology is when someone accidentally creates a small explosion while mixing chemical compounds. Mr. Martinez, Dean Korthek said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had given up trying to understand the universe and decided to just roll with whatever happened next. I believe you may have just revolutionized our understanding of interspecies dynamics, apex predator psychology, and galactic mythology simultaneously. Cool, Jake said, packing up his homework. So does this mean I pass the class? Because I really don't want to take summer session. And that, according to the official university records, was how Jake Martinez became the first human to accidentally domesticate a Voidstalker while doing quantum physics homework. Inadvertently confirmed the existence of the legendary Deathwalkers of Sol 3, and somehow managed to turn a routine xenobiology demonstration into the most significant academic event in galactic history. Fluffy, meanwhile, became the university's first official, emotional support apex predator, though the paperwork for that designation took approximately 6 months to process and required approval from 14 different administrative committees. Jake kept the extra credit,